Now that we've discussed the Basics tab, what I want to do is I want to move on to the Tone Curve tab. Clicking on the Tone Curve tab here will take us into, obviously, the Tone Curve dialog. There are two types of curves in here. One is a parametric curve, and we work within parameters, highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. The other is the point curve, and the point curve is very similar, actually identical, to the curves feature in Photoshop. Now, by default, in the Process 2012, we have a curve that is a straight line. In other words, we're not increasing the highlights or shadows in any way, shape, or form. It's just standard. If I click on the curve drop-down menu here, we can see that we have some other choices. One choice is medium contrast. Not very much, but just enough to give a little kick. This is the default curve in the previous Process version 2010. We can also choose a stronger curve, which is just the same thing with more on it. And then anytime that we come in and modify these points on this curve, we automatically jump to custom. As you can see here, I've created my own personal highlight curve and I've given it a name. If I click on that and release it, you can see how it lightens things a little bit more and probably isn't darkening things quite as much as there. We will get into that a little bit later on. Now, as with all things, when we're working with curves, we can work with the RGB composite, or we can go in and work with the individual red, green, and blue channels. I don't want to do that at this point in time. All I want to do is show you how to manipulate the curve for contrast purposes based on the composite, not the individual channels. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back over here and choose linear. You can see how the histogram has changed. You can see how the image is not quite as jumpy, poppy, whatever you want to call it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the Parametrics tab, and I just want to show you a little bit about how this works. I'm going to raise this value to 40. And what I've done is I've come into the darks area, which is predominantly this quarter tone here, and I've tried to lighten the shadow areas. In doing so, I've also lightened the light areas, and I've also lightened a little bit more of the deep dark shadows. Not necessarily what I wanted to do, so what we're going to do is we're going to play around with the different sliders here. And what we're going to end up doing is moving stuff around. So let's see, if I were to take this way, no, I need to bring this down a little bit. I'm not quite sure how far I want to go, but something like that. And when I did that, notice that I brought my highlights down. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise this a couple of values to get that to go back to where I wanted it to be. Now, what I want to do is I want to work on this end. So I'm going to take this slider, and I'm going to move it down to approximately that value to get this to flatten out. Now you can see that I'm working predominantly in the mid-tone, shadowy area. I guess I could probably try to bring this down a little bit more, and if I bring that down to, say, 26, that means I got to raise this up a little bit more. Really doesn't matter how much or what it is that you're doing, as long as we're getting something that we like. What I can also do is put that back to the 6 that it was, put this back to minus 13, where that was, and then I can actually come in here and say, all right, I don't want to, or I do want to, limit where these pieces are actually getting affected and working. So you can move things around, manipulate things if you want to, whatever turns your crank. I am going to put these all back to 0, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the point curve, and I'm going to start off with medium contrast. And what I want to do is I want to come in here and click on this guy. I've clicked on it. You can see it's solid. I'm just going to hit the up arrow key a couple of times to brighten up that end of things. And I'm going to possibly lighten up the shadow ends a little bit, because I don't want them to be quite as dark as they are. So there you go, up a little bit. And then I'm going to come over here and click on this guy here, and I'm going to raise that up a little bit. So I'm just not making things quite as dark as they were. And I might even come in here and raise that up a little bit as well. What if I came in here and did something like that? I'm going to click on the preview to see the before and the after. All right, I guess I can live with that. So what I want to do is I want to create a preset that will be able to apply this tweak to all future images that were shot under this condition on this part of the strip in Vegas at that walking tour that I was on. So I'm going to come over to the options menu up here. I'm going to come down here and choose Save Settings. In the Save Settings dialog box, the only thing I'm working on is the point curve. So what I'm going to do is come down here and choose point curve. I'm going to click Save. The next dialog box is going to ask me to give it a name. So I'm going to give this a name, and I'm going to call this one John's New Highlight, whatever. Doesn't really matter what you call it. From now on, that is going to be an option that I can come into. So anytime I decide to edit the other images that were shot just before I hit the Harley-Davidson Cafe or just after, I can apply this tone curve and get that tonal adjustment the same as all the other ones.